Part 2 11. Hegel's System of Philosophy. Hegel's System of Philosophy is an epic poem in prose. 12. 15th May 1910. Yesterday morning at about 4, I saw that glorious visitor of our hemisphere, known as Halley's Comet. Once in 75 years, this superb swimmer of infinite space appears on our skies. It is only with the eyes of my grandson that I shall see it again. The state of my mind was quite unique. I felt as if something indescribably vast had been closed up within the narrow limits of my clay. Yet the thought that I could not see this wanderer again brought home to me the painful fact of my littleness. For the moment, all ambition was killed in me. 13. Forms of Government. Let fools fight for the forms of government, says Alexander Pope. I cannot agree with the political philosophy. To my mind, government, whatever its form, is one of the determining forces of a people's character. Ever since their political fall, the Mussulmans of India have undergone a rapid ethical deterioration. Of all the Muslim communities of the world, they are probably the meanest in point of character. I do not mean to deplore our former greatness in this country, for I confess I am almost a fatalist in regard to the various forces that ultimately decide the destinies of nations. As a political force, we are perhaps no longer required, but we are, I believe, still indispensable to the world as the only testimony to the absolute unity of God. Our value among nations, then, is purely evidential. 14. Poetry and Logical Truth. It is idle to seek logical truth in poetry. The ideal of imagination is beauty, not truth. Do not then try to show a poet's greatness by quoting passages from his works which, in your opinion, embody scientific truth. 15. Personal Immortality. Personal immortality is not a state. It is a process. I think the distinction of spirit and body has done a lot of harm. Several religious systems have been based on this erroneous distinction. Man is essentially an energy, a force, or rather a combination of forces which admit of various arrangements. One definite arrangement of these forces is personality. Whether it is a pure chance arrangement does not concern me here. I accept it is a fact among other facts of nature, and try to find out whether this arrangement of forces, so dear to us, can continue as it is. Is it then possible that these forces should continue to work in the same direction as they are working in a living, healthy personality? I think it is. Let human personality be represented by a circle, which is only another way of saying that these forces result in describing a definite circle, which may be obliterated by an upsettle of the arrangement of forces constituting it. How then can we manage to secure the continuance of the circle? Evidently, by energizing in a way calculated to assist the constitutive forces in their regular routine of work. You must give up all those modes of activity which have a tendency to dissolve personality. For example, humility, contentment, slavish obedience, modes of human action which have been erroneously dignified by the name of virtue. On the other hand, high ambition, generosity, charity, and a just pride in our traditions and power fortify the sense of personality. Personality, being the dearest possession of man, must be looked upon as the ultimate good. It must work as a standard to test the worth of our actions. That is good, which has a tendency to give us the sense of personality. That is bad, which has a tendency to suppress and ultimately dissolve personality. By adopting a mode of life calculated to strengthen personality, we are really fighting against death, a shock which may dissolve the arrangement of forces we call personality. Personal immortality then lies in our own hands. It requires an effort to secure the immortality of the person. The idea I have dropped here has far reaching consequences. I wish I could have time to discuss the comparative value of Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity from the standpoint of this idea, but unfortunately, I am too busy to work out the details. 16. History. History is a sort of applied ethics. If ethics is to be an experimental science like other sciences, it must be based on the revelations of human experience. A public declaration of this view will surely shock the susceptibilities even if those who claim to be orthodox in morality, but whose public conduct is determined by the teachings of history. 17. Metaphysics. I confess I am a bit tired of metaphysics, but whenever I happen to argue with people, I find that their arguments are always based on certain propositions, which they assume without criticism. I am therefore driven to examine the value of these propositions. The practical, in its all shapes, drives me back to the speculative. It seems to me to be impossible to get rid of metaphysics altogether. 18. Fanaticism. All nations accuse us of fanaticism. I admit the charge. I go further and say that we are justified in our fanaticism. Translated in the language of biology, fanaticism is nothing but the principle of individuation, working in the case of group. In this sense, all forms of life are more or less fanatical and ought to be so if they care for their collective life. And as a matter of fact, all nations are fanatical. Criticize an Englishman's religion, he is immovable. But criticize his civilization, his country, or the behavior of his nation in any sphere of activity, and you will bring out his innate fanaticism. The reason is that his nationality does not depend on religion. It has a geographical basis, his country. His fanaticism, then, is justly roused when you criticize his country. Our position, however, is fundamentally different. With us, nationality is a pure idea. It has no material basis. Our only relying point is a sort of mental agreement in a certain view of the world. If then our fanaticism is roused when our religion is criticized, I think we are as much justified in our fanaticism as an Englishman is when his civilization is denounced. The feeling in both cases is the same, though associated with different objects. Fanaticism is patriotism for religion, patriotism, fanaticism for country. 19. Patriotism. Islam appeared as a protest against idolatry. And what is patriotism but a subtle form of idolatry? A deification of a material object. The patriotic songs of various nations will bear me out in a calling patriotism a deification of a material object. Islam could not tolerate idolatry in any form. It is our eternal mission to protest against idolatry in all its forms. What was to be demolished by Islam could not be made the very principle of its structure as a political community. The fact that the Prophet prospered and died in a place not his birthplace is perhaps a mystic hint to the same effect. 20. Justice. Justice is an inestimable treasure, but we must guard it against the thief of mercy.